Welcome to the launch event for the Humanitarian Impacts Policy Cycle with the Emerging Voices Network. I know that quite a high number of you are all new members of the EVN, so also welcome to the EVN as a network. We're really thrilled to have you. And we're really excited about this policy cycle. I think it's going to be super interesting. Today, the idea of this meeting was so that, one, we could kind of just get things started and kick off before you go away in your working groups to actually start drafting, researching, and writing. But also so that we, as the EVN team, me at the moment, could run through some of the kind of housekeeping, the expectations, and then also give you a space to, one, meet your working group chairs, some of whom have been able to join us today, and then also to be able to ask any questions that you might have at this point moving forwards. Given that obviously right now it's the very beginning, I can imagine that this is going to be kind of an ongoing thing and you'll have lots of questions to come as well. So I'd like to just reiterate that myself and the working group chairs are here to be able to make sure that this is an ongoing conversation. If you're unsure of things, you can come to us and we will do our very best to make sure that you feel fully informed on everything that's happening and you're able to contribute. So with that, what I'll do first is just kind of introduce the policy cycle and tell you what the kind of thinking was behind why we've chosen humanitarian impacts as a subject area, and what we're kind of hoping to get out of it. So this is part of our funded project with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway. And an area of interest within this project that we're doing as part of the Inclusive International Security Program at BASIC is very much centered around the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. As some of you might know, we've had events in the last couple of months and prior to that centered around it. For example, we just had a panel discussion, I think definitely a few weeks ago, about humanitarian impacts within the NPT and what we think is kind of in store for this new review cycle that's just kicked off. And that was kind of centered so that we could kind of nicely feed into setting up this policy cycle for you guys. So it's funded by the Norwegian MFA. And for us as a team at the EVN and also the IAS program, this is something that we're very interested in. I think it's a very prevalent subject area at the moment within the nuclear field. There has been a lot of traction, a lot of improvement and growth. For example, with the Humanitarian Initiative, the success of the TPNW and its first MSP last year. We're coming up on the second meeting of states parties in a couple of weeks. And alongside that, given the kind of security context that we're in right now with the war in Ukraine, with a number of other high priority subjects, some states, some civil society across the field, some stakeholders find that maybe it's not the time to engage with humanitarian impacts the way that we would. And so that's, it's an interesting time and it's opened it up to a lot of like maybes, possibilities, opportunities, and obstacles. So that's kind of a bit of context. But we decided that a policy cycle would be a good opportunity to run again because we've had a bit of success with our previous ones. As some of you might know, we had a policy cycle on de-siloing existential threats last year, and that was a really, really cool cycle. We had quite a high number of participants, and it led to the release of an anthology that was about like that big, with I think 5 or 6 different policy papers, all kind of working around this subject of de-siloing existential threats in the nuclear policy field. So we found with that not only was it a really great experience for all of us to be able to get some writing practice, to get published, and to get to know others in the field through the working groups, but also that it ended up being quite a useful resource for a number of stakeholders in the field. At the last PrepCon that we were at, we had some feedback from civil society who'd said that they'd read the report and they'd really enjoyed it and they'd gained something from it. And as some MFAs had also said that, it was a resource that had fallen onto their desks, they'd had a look at it and they had some takeaways from it. So it's, these policy cycles also offer a really meaningful and valuable contribution to the field as a space for where stakeholders can come and look at intergenerational perspectives on specific nuclear issues. And it's also just, as I mentioned, a really cool opportunity for you guys to be able to write on something you know about, something you care about, and get published. So that is kind of the background. We decided that we would focus mainly on the NPT as the subject area for this policy paper because, as some of you may know, within the TPNW, there's much more of a homogenous, I guess, kind of perspective on humanitarian impacts, its value, the progress that needs to be made, and the work that needs to be done towards it. But within the NPT space, given the fact that we've got a new cycle coming, has just started now as well, you've got a range of stakeholders. Some states don't engage with humanitarian impacts at all due to angst about legal liabilities, due to their government mandated positions. Other states are really keen and they're member states of the TPNW. And so they're really looking to push it forward within the NPT agenda, especially with the disarmament pillar. And so there's quite a broad scope, and that's opened up a whole bunch of obstacles and opportunities. And we thought that that would be quite a fertile ground for you all to explore the topics of your working groups and how you would visualize and come up with innovative ideas to strengthen the humanitarian impacts agenda within that space. The ultimate goal of this policy paper and this policy cycle is that at the end we get a combination of your 5 working groups' policy papers that are compiled into an anthology, and that will be a primarily digital resource. So we will publish it online on the basic website, for which you will be credited, but it'll be an output aimed mainly at NPT stakeholders for the most part, probably the diplomats, but for some of your working groups, it will be interesting and necessary to explore some of the other stakeholders in the room, including civil society, academia, and so basically just for this to be, one, a learning experience for all of you, but also for it to actually be a meaningful contribution to the field, like I was saying before. Today, I'm going to introduce you to your working group chairs. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and the timeline that we've got scheduled out. And then I will open it up to questions. And I've scheduled the meeting for 1 hour and 15 minutes, but I'm going to do my very best to give you at least 15 minutes of freedom from that meeting so you can get back to your days. And I really appreciate the fact that you have all tuned in because I know you're across a number of time zones. So I'm going to quickly share my screen, and if some of you could just maybe nod that you can see my screen, that would be amazing. Right, can you see? Amazing. So the first thing, it is really important to us as a network that we foster a safe, inclusive, and respectful environment. So one of the great things about these policy cycles is that we get to explore and engage with a really diverse range of ideas and views. Diversity in perspective is what makes effective and meaningful and kind of groundbreaking policy work. But with that in mind, we want to make sure that every single one of you has a safe and positive experience moving forwards. And so you'll be familiar with the EVN Code of Conduct because you signed it as part of your application. But just to run through it again, you can find it on the website, and I will be sending a summary of the meeting afterwards with the recording link, and I will link to the EVN Code of Conduct again, just in case you'd like to refresh. But for the most part, as you can see, it's very much about respect, diversity, equity, and inclusion, accountability, and just basically keeping it positive, keeping it nice. And as the EVN team, we first and foremost are committed to making sure that that's maintained. So we have had extensive conversations, and we will with each of you and with the working group chairs about how we can make sure that that safe space is maintained throughout this policy cycle. And I would like for you guys to know that if anything does happen, you do feel uncomfortable, there is any kind of concern that you might have, we are here to support you, and that is our main priority. So you are more than welcome. You can email the EVN inbox, which is here, and I will send you the link as well. Most of the emails you get will either be from me or from that inbox address. Or you can also reach out directly to a member of the EVN team. That includes me. It includes my colleagues Declan and Kim, who you won't meet today, but you will see at some point during this cycle. And their contact details are also on the basic staff page. And if for whatever reason you would also like to kind of maybe speak to your working group chairs before, you're welcome to do that as well. And I've asked them to also kind of keep us in the loop about those in case there's anything that maybe needs to be escalated or we should kind of step in and handle. But that's just basically to kind of set the tone that we want this to be the best experience you can have. The other thing that I think it's good for us to talk about is, in the past, with the policy cycles, we've had a range of capacity and commitment. And understandably, given that this is an extracurricular voluntary commitment for most of you, if not all, you're going to have a lot of things on your plate, and this won't be the first thing that you have time to do. And we completely understand that, which is why we've tried to kind of spread it out over a couple months, and we've set like a kind of limited amount of hours that we need from you in terms of meeting and writing. Of course, when it comes to like writing the actual thing, you'll probably have to be a bit more online and involved. But for the most part, we aren't looking to like steal 40 hours of your week or anything like that. What we would really, really like to emphasize with each and every one of you is communication. We completely understand if for whatever reason you are not in a position to be able to continue, you change your mind, you have difficulties, or whatever circumstance comes up. But what we don't want is that you drop off the face of the earth and we don't hear from you again, or that our working group chairs and the rest of your team are put in a difficult professional position where they're not sure if you're there, if they can rely on you, and whether you should be credited and included at the end. And so we would like to set that expectation. It's okay if things change, and we just really encourage you to communicate that with us as soon as possible, and we will make space for that. I would like to say that, of course, we understand that sometimes personal difficulties, care responsibilities, health, all of these things also sometimes mention that you can't show up in the way that you maybe plan to or as much as you would like. And we are flexible and sensitive to that. So again, we're an open point of communication, and we will do our very best to make sure that this is accessible for you. What we've set as a baseline standard of expectation is that you basically go to like 80% of the meetings and you don't miss more than 2 consecutively unless you've given like a good reason. So we're also asking that if you think you're going to skip out or miss one of the meetings, you give prior notice to your working group chair. Of course, then that means that if it gets to a point where we feel like it's maybe a little bit excessive, we might have a conversation with you about what that looks like moving forwards. And like I've said, again, we're always here for you to reach out. We generally, because of professional boundaries and just like what works, will communicate with you through email and Slack. And if I'm not mistaken, every single one of you should have had a Slack invite by now. And that will just kind of add you to the workspace. And within the next few days, I will add you all to like a policy cycle working group channel, basically. So it's like one main space for all of us on the cycle. And then like each of you will be split up into your working groups. And I've asked your working group chairs to kind of use Slack and email primarily for communication with you both. I really do ask that you keep that in mind and you stay online and you check Slack. I personally, Slack was my enemy for a really long time when I entered the professional space. Absolutely hated it, but I've given in because it is the primary way that I get in touch with my colleagues, and using it actively makes this easier for everyone. Closer to the time of like writing and getting your kind of drafts together, I totally understand if, for example, amongst yourselves informally, you choose to communicate over a WhatsApp group or a Facebook Messenger group or by text. In the past, I know I participated in Policy Cycle. We did that just because it was a little bit easier to coordinate. That's okay, as long as it doesn't kind of like veer into the formal side of things because of like our boundaries about like work, data protection, that kind of thing. So if you text on a WhatsApp group chat to coordinate and have a conversation about the content yourselves, that's totally fine. But anything super formal, engaging with the EVN team, that will always be done through Slack and through email. So the next thing is just the basic kind of like bare bones of the policy paper. By December 11th, we're hoping that you will be able to meet that deadline to get us an abstract. So by the abstract, what we mean is just a one-pager, and that one page will kind of give us a brief overview of what it is you're going to talk about in your policy paper to do with your working group topic. So basically your main argument, your methodology, kind of, and like a brief summary and conclusion. And that is so that we are able to kind of have a quick review earlier on in the process of the policy cycle, so that if there is like any red flags, or we might think that maybe it's worth reviewing that idea or kind of tidying things up, we do that sooner rather than later, so you don't end up putting a bunch of time into writing an amazing paper, but then we have to cut half of it down or anything like that. We found that this was quite helpful in managing the last policy cycle. So we do ask that you respect that deadline and you stick to the December 11th date and you get that abstract done. Keep it to 1 page, because that's how you know that your policy paper will be concise and effective and like impactful. And that leads me on to your policy papers. The final thing, we're asking for no more than a max of 8 pages. In an ideal world, it'll be about 5 to 6, but we understand that with the kind of weight of some of the topics that you're talking about, it might be a little more than that and you might need some space. What a policy paper looks like is something that I will send you an example of by email after this meeting as well. I'll send you our last anthology from the previous policy cycle, because that's pretty much identical to what this one will look like in terms of format and content. But like I said, 5 to 8 pages max. And it's going to be basically like introduction, your main argument, your literature review and methodology, and then you kind of give the juice of what it is that you're talking about and like the content. And then a policy paper basically ends with like a literal chunk, like a bullet point list of explicit recommendations. And those need to be like clear, straight to the point, targeted, and concise. Because the idea is that, as some of you may know, NPT stakeholders are very busy people. Diplomats especially, they have 101 different pieces of paper drop on their desk. So when they open a policy paper, they want to look at it and basically like get to it straightforward and easily. And you want it to kind of like make your point as effectively as possible in as few words. And that's what will grab their attention and hopefully communicate some of your great ideas. What I will do next, I'm going to just stop sharing so you guys are able to then see everyone, and I'm going to not spotlight myself because this also feels very spotlighty, I guess. I'm going to quickly ask for the working group chairs, just as I call them, to maybe like wave through the screen and just like quickly say a brief hello, like maybe just like where you're working, what your name is, because that would be great. And if some of the working group chairs aren't here, so we'll just like kind of skip past. For the strengthening of the humanitarian impacts agenda through nuclear safety and safeguarding, your working group chairs will be Mark and Saba. So Saba, do you want to like quickly just wave and maybe say hello?
Hi everyone. I hope I am audible. Am I? Yeah. So I am a researcher at Center for International Strategic Studies, Islamabad. I am basically from Islamabad, Pakistan. I am really excited to be here, and I'll be co-chairing this group that Anahita just mentioned. And looking forward for the work. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. Mark isn't with us today, so you will get the chance to meet him in your first meetings. For the strengthening the humanitarian impacts agenda through civil society and the NPT, your working group chairs are Mackenzie and Callie. Mackenzie's not able to join us, but Callie, if you want to just like quickly wave and say hello as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to get to know you all during the course of the policy cycle. A little bit about myself. I have a background in Eastern European studies, and I'm currently the events coordinator and conference coordinator at IISS. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone and working with you on the policy paper. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. For the working group topic of engaging the P5 with the humanitarian impacts agenda, your working group chairs will be Vivian and Eleanor. I'm not sure if Eleanor's with us today, but Vivian, I think, is on the call. So if you want to quickly hop in and say hello, that would be great.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to wave with my video off as it is before 7 a.m. In my time zone, but very happy to be on the call and to join this policy cycle as well. I'm currently a non-resident fellow of Council on Strategic Risks, and I've also co-chaired another working group in the previous policy cycle that Anahita has presented. So I'm quite happy to get into all the research and the writing with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. The next working group is strengthening the humanitarian impacts agenda through diversity, equity, and inclusion within the NPT. The working group chairs for that are Hree and Ali. Ali, some of you might have seen, was on the call but had to drop because of another work commitment, so I won't bring him in. And I think Hree, due to the very, very brutal time difference, will not be able to tune in. But like I mentioned, you guys will have the chance to meet them directly once you get your first working group meetings. And the final working group, last but not least, is strengthening the humanitarian impacts agenda through nuclear education and knowledge within the NPT. And your working group chairs are Maren and Chase. Maren, do you want to maybe come in?
Sure, thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Maren. I'm from Germany, but I currently live in Austria. So same language, but different. I'm a PhD researcher and I'm working on nuclear norms mostly, and I'm really looking forward to our work.
Amazing, thank you so much. And Chase is also not able to join us today. So with that, basically the next steps after this will be that I will reach out to your working group chairs, give them a little bit more of this information on paper and your contact details. I'll be sharing your emails and then obviously putting them onto the Slack workspace with the chats. And they'll just reach out to you and they'll basically get your first meeting set up and kind of get started with this whole process. But just before that, I'm going to share my screen once again, just to run through the timeline a little closely, in case that is helpful. So, as you know, October, we're kicking things off today. And so the idea is that, like I said, after today's meeting, you'll be able to kind of go away and get started. What we're asking you to get started with now is basically brainstorming, a bit of research, and drafting that abstract, like I mentioned, that one-pager. So I've said here mid-December, and I've confirmed, and I will confirm with your working group chairs, the 11th of December deadline. Throughout this process, I will be meeting with the working group chairs at least once a month, just to check in with them if they've got any questions and issues. If you guys have any questions you'd like to submit through them, I'm going to open up that space so we have kind of ongoing communication and we're able to kind of like anticipate things as they come. But hopefully you guys will also be regularly meeting with one another throughout that process anyway. Once your abstracts are submitted mid-December, of course, it's the Christmas break. Many of you will be out of office. Basic, very lovely, also has a week out of office around the Christmas period, which I love. So that gives a little bit of leeway for that like kind of holiday period. But by the end of January, we will have kind of by the early mid part of January gotten back to you, and we would have submitted, kind of returned your abstracts, and we would have given you feedback. I'm going to aim for that to be done as soon as possible, so you guys have as much of January to kind of work comfortably. So assume that like in the first 2 weeks of January, I'll give you feedback on those abstracts. And then we ask that by like the end of January, and understandably, I understand if, for example, there are any problems with the abstract, you might need a bit of time. So I've put that as kind of like a tentative deadline, but I can push that to kind of the beginning of February as well. You guys will submit your first drafts. So that would be like the first version of the 5 to 8 pages you submit with your policy paper kind of written up, including your policy recommendations. We will review those. And by mid-February, we will get back to you and we will let you know of any edits, any changes, and any questions that we might have about it. Historically, working groups, there's been quite a breadth of difference in terms of like what we've gotten in those first drafts. Some groups are pretty much good to go. It's a bit of like spelling and grammar, cutting things down. Other groups still have a lot of like kind of like cohesion in terms of like pulling their argument together and trimming things down. So we will do our very best to be as informative and communicative with you so you guys know what to work towards for those final drafts. Once they get back to you mid-February, you have until the beginning of March. And all of these deadlines right now are tentative, but given your progress, I'll also kind of confirm these specific dates to submit them to me closer to the time. And I'll be in conversation with your working group chairs about that. But early March, you'll basically submit your final draft. And that is just like you've handed your babies over to me, and myself and the rest of the EVN team will do a quick review, spelling and grammar check. If there's anything that we need to just cut down for the sake of the word limits, like the page limits, or for example, like we said, in terms of like the EVN code of conduct and stuff, if there's anything that's a glaring red flag, we'll communicate it with you and take that out. We do give ourselves that space basically to kind of do that in terms of the editing process. Bearing in mind, of course, one of the challenges and I guess opportunities of this is that when you're writing a policy paper for MFAs, some like The difference of a policy paper with an op-ed or an academic article, often you have a bit more flexibility to say things the way you want to say them, as hard-hitting as you want to say them. Policy papers have to be a little bit more like measured or diplomatic in language. And so we will do our very best to also help you navigate that, because we want this to be authentic and genuine to what you believe in and what you think should be done, but also so that it reads like an actual policy paper by the end. So basically, by the end of March, we will have compiled every single working group's paper into this final anthology. And that will get a really nice cover with a graphic designer. We will write a little introduction as the basic team to kind of contextualize why this policy paper exists and who it's aimed at. And then, of course, you guys will all be acknowledged and credited as the authors of these papers. And by the end of April, early May, the anthology will be released. We're going to launch that publicly. It'll be a virtually available digital resource, so people will have it as a PDF online. Last PrepCom that we went to a couple of months back, we had these little business cards. It was like a quick scan with a QR code, and people could get the policy paper up on their phones. And we found that that got a bit of interest, and it was like quite a nice way for people to kind of get it and have something to read on the way back from the conference. And so we'll probably do that again as well. And part of that launch will involve an EVN event, and that will be like a public webinar. Hopefully all of you guys will be able to attend, because this is going to be your baby getting released to the world. But your working group chairs will be responsible for kind of speaking at that and presenting each of the policy papers, the process, the summary, and the findings of your reports. There is a small possibility, if the deadline and the timeline kind of coincides, we might make that work alongside the next PrepCom at the end of July in 2024. But realistically, sometimes it's just like more effective that these things happen standalone as an EVN event, and that we're able to like promote it once we get to PrepCom is like, look, it's out. This is the event. Here's who's read it. How about you give it a read as well? So that's kind of what we've got in mind. So with that, that's the timeline. And I'm aware that I've been talking at you for quite some time. We have about 15-ish minutes, maybe, if I kind of want to keep things in. Thanks so much to those of you. I understand if you have to like drop off because it's the start of the hour, but I do want to just give space for any questions. And thank you for bearing with me. I know this was a lot of talking, but if you do have any questions now, I'm just going to kind of let you just feel free to raise your hand, pop them in the chat, and I'll be there to respond. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Anahita. Am I audible?
Yeah.
I hope there's no echoing of my voice. Okay, great. Thank you very much, first of all, for convening this all-important, I would say, strand of EVN. And as someone who is looking at these things already in various capacities, I think it's important for us, given the proceedings of the previous NPT, previous PrepCom, and and how the chair, in a rather bizarre manner, had to come up with not with a factual summary, but a report at the end, because Iran objected to the language of the factual summary that was pretty condescending with reference to JCPOA. I think it's very important. I have already written in the chat box that despite all the emphasis being laid on the humanitarian impacts agenda since 2000 and the 2010 REFCON, if you look at the working papers and the statements, you find not that much on this side of the equation. Perhaps because it has been hijacked, so to speak, by the TPNW, which has not been that big of a success. So I think it's important for people, for organizations like us and people like us, to really chip in and chime in at when the actual policymakers are not doing much. So I think this allows us a lot of space and room to work in. And yes, if we could dovetail this with the upcoming second session of the preparatory committee meeting for the RefCon 2026. I think that this would be a great contribution.
Amazing. Thank you for that. So yeah, it is. I definitely say, like, given, for example, what happened at the first PrepCon, like I said, I think this will be a really interesting context for you guys to come up with a policy paper and recommendations. You're going to have a lot more to consider. Maybe there's like going to be a little bit more of a range in the kind of ideas that you come up with. For example, those working papers in the past and some of those like statements from MFAs that you mentioned, most of those I think are still available on the Reaching Critical Will website. And as with other policy cycles that we've had, some groups have found it relevant to go and have a look back at those as like resources, just to see like what the landscape already looks like, whether it's of interest to them, what existing language has looked like. Yeah, Reaching Critical Will and UNODA. So I definitely like encourage you guys, if you think that that might be useful to you or of interest like to your working group topic, once you kind of start those conversations, definitely feel free to go back and have a reference. I think it's good for me to mention that like we are able as civil society with a policy paper like this to go into that space and promote it and kind of like disseminate it, share the like report and encourage people to read it. But for example, with the last PrepCon, civil society wasn't allowed to submit working papers. So we wouldn't necessarily be able to do it in that formal capacity. If that option is available to civil society this time around, it is something that I'm open to exploring. But of course, we can't submit like a big anthology. So that would possibly mean that some of you will have to like boil things down to a one-page working paper, for example, your abstracts. But I think like Rob, let's kind of wait to cross that bridge once we get to it. But you're right, there is a lot of value to contribute things in this space. And I hope that you guys have a good time with it. Like, honestly, I think I hope that your main takeaway from this, besides all the housekeeping, is that this is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be really interesting. And I hope you really gain from it the way that we're hoping that you do. We know some of our policy cycle members in the past who were working together on working groups have stayed in touch professionally. Like they've been able to like co-author other papers and like op-eds together in the public space, that kind of thing. And that's a really nice thing for us to see as the EVN team. And it's what we're hoping kind of is the longevity and the like legend that stays after this, like once you leave, what you gain. But yeah, basically my main thing is enjoy this, respect one another, and like just kind of like get to the juice and come up with some cool ideas. I will give you back your time. I don't want to keep you any longer than I have. I'm really grateful to everyone for tuning in during some very, very awkward time zones. And also just for kind of bearing with me as I've been talking at you. This is the first and the last time I'll speak so much in a one-way direction. The rest will be mostly conversations. If you do have questions in the future, you are more than welcome to email me directly, the EVN inbox, but also your working group chairs, of course. They're kind of meant to be your main point of contact and they will lead and coordinate things. I've just seen one message. Okay, cool. I've had 1 or 2 people inquire about whether it's possible to change their working groups. Given how we allocated spaces, that's not something that we would be able to do like flexibly at the moment, because it was based on like the application that you gave, how we like delegated everyone across the working groups to make sure that as many people got their first choices. So unfortunately, sorry, we wouldn't necessarily, I know 1 or 2 of you were interested in doing that, but it wouldn't be possible. But that's like, I hope that you can understand that. And if there is, for whatever reason, like I said at the very beginning, you change your mind about kind of participating in general, that's totally fine. Just like, let us know as soon as possible, because of course, like, ultimately, this is an opportunity that like a lot of people applied for, and we want to make sure that it's being made the most of. But I guess with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the week and a great weekend. I will send a summary with the recording link by email probably tomorrow or maybe sometime the day after. But otherwise, besides that, I hope that this was helpful, and thank you so much. Bye.